Hi, welcome to Beat Goblin. I'm putting this on the second channel for two reasons. First of all, I just don't want the main channel to become Synth Drama Central. Just not at all interested in that. And then secondly, this is going to be a bit of a one-take wonder. I'm going to try to go through this with as little editing as possible. But I do want to talk about this because I've worked with Akai in the past, most recently during the announcement of the 2.11 free firmware update for the standalone MPCs. I tried it out, tried the new effects and some of its new workflow features, and it was a good time. And they told me, hey, there's more on the way, stay tuned. And I haven't talked to them since then, but since not only have they actually released that firmware to the public, but they've also announced and released two other things, two expensive things. They announced the MPC Keys, which is kind of a flagship keyboard version of the standalone MPCs. And it's loaded with 6 new software instruments, 6 new plugins, and you can buy those plugins as essentially DLC. To get all 6 of them is $500, which is pretty pricey. I'll get to that in a second. That's where the crux of this lies. And to get each individually is $150. So, in scrolling through the comments, I saw a split of opinions. Some people were pissed, and understandably so. They've already spent a good amount of money on a standalone device, and now it feels like Akai is trying to milk a whole lot more out of them. On the other hand, there are people who are saying, hey, this looks great, I'll buy it. I am going to start with my personal recommendation because I want to be consumer first at all times. My personal recommendation based on what I think is good value, and then I'll get into like why I think Akai did this, how we got here, and whether I have any moral outrage. And I'm going to tie this back to Teenage Engineering, because back when Teenage Engineering did a similarly price hiking move, people were also pissed, and I did a video about it, and I'm going somewhere with this, so stick with me. But first, I've said this before this was announced many times. The standalone MPCs are great value for money, especially the MPC one, and this doesn't change that. These are devices that punch way above their weight, give you absolutely everything you need to make good hip-hop or electronic music in a standalone device, and I'm still happy to recommend them. I've got a lot more videos on both my channels, on my main channel and this one, coming with the MPC one. I still think it's great value for money. This new announcement doesn't change that. However, I don't think that this new suite of 6 plugins is great value. Like, it's too much to pay for what it is, in my personal opinion. I am not going to be buying the pack, not out of any moral outrage, but just literally it's not worth it to me. However, what I might do is just cherry pick the one plugin that actually is calling to me, and that's going to be the FM synth. If I get it. I might not. I'm still like weighing it in my mind, but I might get that one because that would help beef up the built-in synth stuff in the MPC a good bit. It's an actual plugin rather than a multi-sampled instrument like the piano or electric pianos are. That one's tempting me. That one's calling me. And if you're in the same boat, if you are simultaneously completely turned off by the $500 price tag, but also do like the idea of getting some new pluginage for your standalone MPC, I would just cherry pick one of them and ignore the rest. That's my recommendation. It's still expensive, and if you're disgusted by Akai after this, I totally understand. But here's how I think we got here. So the MPC Keys is meant to be like a premium product for very successful gigging musicians or fancy studios cranking out hits. That's the perception I have anyway. It comes in a little under $2,000, which is quite a bit of a bump from the previous standalone MPCs. And like I said, it comes preloaded with those 6 virtual instruments. And so what I think they're trying to do is keep the value of those instruments being loaded into it high, or being perceived as high. And so they're going to charge a lot for you to basically upgrade your current standalone MPC to match the level of the MPC Keys, just, of course, minus the keyboard and touch bar, which, of course, some people are going to call that gimmicky. Touch bars can be kind of gimmicky, but that's another topic for another day. Regardless, I think that's what they're trying to do with this. I think that's where the pricing comes from, more than what each plugin is intrinsically worth, and we might see the prices come down, but if we don't, I would say you're safe to just ignore them, honestly. You can replicate a lot of what's built in with much cheaper key group programs that you either buy or create yourself. Now, where I think Akai goofed on this one is partially on the price. I think it's not worth it, and I think that some people are going to see that as like a slap in the face to the community. I don't necessarily see that way, but I definitely understand that perspective. Where I think they goofed the biggest is trying to be a little too clever with the rollout. I think they knew that there was going to be backlash, or maybe they just didn't want to spoil the proper announcement of the MPC keys. But regardless, they seemed to very deliberately announce the free firmware update with new stuff first and get the community all like, oh, we love you, Akai. You release free stuff all the time for us. You're great. And then they hit you with the $500 thing. And I think that's where a lot of the backlash is coming from. I think they tried to like get people on their side before like cashing in those goodwill points. And I think it's a little more transparent than they thought it would be. I think it's kind of obvious that they've done that, at least in my opinion. And so I think in doing so, they've made themselves look kind of sneaky and underhanded with the way they've gone about this. I think that's the biggest thing that they've screwed up. I think if they were upfront and said, hey, we've got a free firmware update as per usual, and we're adding some paid stuff, I think that may have gone over better. Of course, we won't know that, but I think they're very much justified to charge something for those plugins, which I've seen people say that as well. Like, hey, I'm perfectly happy to pay for new plugins. That's very understandable, just not at this price. I think they're perfectly justified to charge something for them, especially given the R&D time it takes to develop something like that. But I do understand people feeling upset and frustrated. And just remember two things. Companies are not your friends. Even if you absolutely adore the product they released, the company is not your friend and will probably disappoint you at some point, especially enthusiast brands. And don't ever buy something based off of potential future firmware updates. The MPC was already a good buy before this whole thing, and it continues to be a good buy even if this whole thing never happened. And I would base your purchasing decisions off of that and nothing else. Is the thing I'm looking at buying a good deal right now? If it isn't, and if you're waiting for a firmware update to come in and make it a good deal in the future, and you buy it based off that, I would say don't do that, ever. And I would say if the MPC was good enough for you before, it can continue to be good enough for you now. You just might have a little less goodwill towards Akai, which is very understandable. Or if it's not good enough for you, maybe it was never good enough for you, because let's be honest, the synth engines on the MPCs are bit hit or miss. Most of them are just mid. Like the hype synth is pretty good and the drum synth is pretty good. And even those are just pretty good, maybe not amazing. But stuff like, I don't really know if people are using the tube synth anymore, for instance. So they definitely needed some new high quality virtual instruments, but even then, most of us are probably using samples and key group programs anyway, and you can still do that. So the last thing I want to mention is this anything like the backlash for Teenage Engineering? And am I going to come down as hard on Akai as I did on Teenage Engineering? Seemingly. And the answer is yes and no. Yes, as in I am giving them a little bit of shit for it, and no, as in I didn't actually give Teenage Engineering as much shit as I think people think I did. That video was a YouTube short, and therefore maybe not as nuanced as it should have been because I had to cram it into 60 seconds. But it almost functioned as a bit of a video Rorschach test for your own opinions. Some people saw me explaining how Teenage Engineering got to this point and then giving my opinion that it's not great value for the money. And people saw me as like calling them out and really, sticking it to them. And then other people saw me as just like bitching and moaning and whining because it's too expensive. Neither of which was the case. I was trying to give what I thought was a fairly neutral take on it, although I am well aware that the title and thumbnail were quite provocative, and, that's the game I'm playing, obviously. But regardless, I didn't come out that hard on Teenage Engineering. I basically said, hey, they're obviously trying to pivot their demographic, and they don't mind if they alienate people. I didn't say if that was good or bad, just that it simply is. And personally, I would say don't get it. I think it's a ripoff for 99% of people. With Akai, my take is much the same. I don't think it's great value for money, and I think that you should either just dip your toes into it or leave it alone entirely. And I think they were maybe a little scummier than I would have expected out of them with the way they tried to roll it out. But I don't think it's like a morally outrageous thing. It's not food or shelter or water. So I'm frustrated by it, especially since I've got a lot more MPC content coming out. I'm still going to use this stuff all the time and like publicly endorse it essentially. But I'm also not going to go as far as to like call the company out, because I don't think what they did was morally wrong. I think it was just maybe a bit weird. So that's my like fence straddling genuine opinion. I swear to God. Some people say like, oh, Gabe, stop straddling the fence and tell us your real opinion. Sometimes my opinion is a fence straddling one. From the bottom of my freaking heart, my opinion is a lukewarm one. And that's the case here. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Maybe you think I'm completely off base. Maybe you think I've hit on something here. Let me know. Be sure to subscribe for much more polished content coming very soon on this channel. I'm about to really ramp up the content on here. All that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, I'll see you in a little bit.